Oh, that,
Yep, now you're on.
It was great. I really did enjoy it.
These secrets. Or say anything bad about anybody when that red light's on.
15 years. Yeah, so,
I
that's the
lost
thing
my
that the
neighbor.
AP kids liked.
I lost my
My
neighbor.
husband and I ended up taking them to the Marion ethanol plant.
No, I went and got a chair for her too.
Outside of school to give them the concept of applied chemistry, the difference between a lab position and an engineering position, and they, the one girl went on, she went to mines and got a chemical engineering degree, and another kid in there, I think he got a civil with environmental emphasis, and
Done a lot of students in high school that have gone to tech.
are we good to go? Okay, I've got my agenda up here, so I can read that tiny screen. So if everyone would turn your microphones on, please. Now, last time I noticed, we could only have so many microphones on before they all shut off. So if you look around and the little red lights are off, please say something. So at least we're getting this on the video. So time being 4 o'clock, I will call the meeting of our task force together. First item on the agenda is roll call.
Healy,
Here,
Heine,
Here.
Kettering. Here. Los,
Here.
Nelson,
Here.
Welsh,
here,
Catali,
Here.
Burns,
here,
Hornstra.
here.
Great, we have a full participation today, wonderful. Item number 2, well, I guess that was, call to order. Number 2 was roll call. Number 3, financial conflict of interest or non-financial conflict of interest. If we could,
Before we go any further, just, there was a request that maybe you three state your name when you're saying something since you're off camera. That'd be great, thank you.
all right, so let's start over here with Robert. Do you have any conflicts?
I have none.
Loest has none.
Horstra has none.
Ryan has none.
Ely has none.
Nelson has none.
Catholic has none.
Welsh has none.
Mr. Kettering, do you have any conflicts you would like to declare?
Kettering has none.
Thank you. All right, item number 4, approval of, let's do the agenda first. Are there any changes to the agenda? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve as presented.
I so move.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda as presented. Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Agenda is approved. Now we will approve the minutes from January 25th. Are there any corrections? If not, entertain a motion to approve.
I make a motion.
Second.
So I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes as presented. Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, nay.
Aye.
Motion carries. The minutes are approved. Item 5, public comment. Would any person care to make a public comment at this time? We usually allow 3 minutes. And if we could, hang on, I'm going to turn the microphone on for
You
you.
want me to time it?
All right, Gary, is there no, I guess I pushed hard enough. You're good to go.
I'd like to say that I was invited to come, so that's why I'm here. I'm Ed Van Gerpen from Avon. I'm a county commissioner in Bonham County and a former legislator. I've taken an interest in this wind issue. I grew up on a farm prior to REA, and as most farms were, we had a windmill. But due to the fact that wind is not an energy source that you can depend on, all the farmers always had a storage tank that you'd fill that when the wind was blowing, and then cattle would always have water. I think the subject is kind of setbacks, isn't it? Or I thought you said.
That's part of today, yes,
Oh, part,
setbacks.
okay. You know, things have changed. Used to be there was somebody living on every quarter and they didn't farm someplace else or they didn't own land someplace else. But in this last wind park we built, there's 58 towers. It involves 40 people. Only 6 of those 40 live a mile from a tower. The rest all live off, like Wagner, Scotland. One lives in New Jersey. So they really don't have a interest really in where the thing is at. And one person, my son's own land there, and that's kind of why I got involved. And I think I shared last time, we can't spray with a plane now because of those wind towers. But the person the one that's closest to one of the lands we farm, she lives in Sioux Falls, so it doesn't affect her at all. All she cares about is her check. And another farm, there's 4 wind towers close around. And all of those people who own those, or own the land, they don't live anywhere as close. And so I just don't think that's quite fair that they should be able to come in and disturb other people's lives. Another deal we had was they built close, and there's quite a bit to the story, but anyway, the wife said that we can't even have our windows open. I don't know if you've ever been around a wind tower, but every time the blade comes in front of the tower, whop, whop, whop. And it gets kind of sickening. Let's see, what else do I want to share? Well, if you want a starting point on this setback, at that wind farm, there's a eagle's nest. And that eagle nest had a 2-mile setback. So if an eagle gets 2 miles, you know, how much should a human being get? I would think 2 miles would be about right too. So, and that wasn't even the worst of it. These people who were signing up these farmers, they knew that landowner wouldn't get a wind tower because of that eagle's nest. And yet they signed them up, and then they went and mortgaged their land. It's right in the easement that they can mortgage that land. And luckily, we had some land north of town that sold, and I'll have to apologize if I'm repeating a little bit because I didn't keep notes. And that farm was for sale, and we found out it was mortgaged. It didn't have a wind tower on it or lines underneath. And I went to District 3 and we contacted a lawyer in Minneapolis, and I might even have given you a copy of that letter from that lawyer where they did away with all those mortgages. So now if they want to sell their land, they can without mortgage. And one more I'd like to share with you. I thought of it this morning. I used to go into Sioux County all the time, hauling hay. And I noticed there's no wind towers there. And come to find out that the commissioners have a policy or whatever that if you have a wind tower on your place, when it gets done doing its business and it's wore out, the farmer is responsible to bring the land back to normal. That includes taking out about 3 feet of cement. Well, they don't want to do that, so there's no wind towers in Sioux County. So there was a new dairy by Sanborn, so I drove over there to see if I could sell them some hay. And I noticed there was wind towers there, so I talked to the dairyman, and he had really had a bad feeling towards them. They found out that when they come in and plowing the wires in, they were hitting drain tile. and that caused all kinds of problems. And now that it's in, now they can't spread their manure with, where they inject it. They won't let them, even though the wires might be a little lower. And so this dairy I was going to, he says, we really got a problem now. We produce so much manure, and we don't have any place to go with it because of those wires underground. So these are some of the negative things that have come up, and I think you should know about that, and thank you.
Thank
If you
you.
got any questions later on or whatever, I'll try and answer.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Yes, sir.
I just have one question. If I get up and talk, will there be, are you from the paper? So there's a chance this, my story, what I say will get into the paper?
Sir, the meeting is being recorded as well.
Okay, well that, I'm fine with that.
Okay, so if you want to, come up to the,
State your name, please.
My name is Randy Wagner,
Randy Wagner, okay.
and I was born and raised on a farm in Wayne County, Nebraska. Farmed for many years, and the home that we had lived in for decades and decades, now within a 2-mile radius of our home, there's 20-some towers, wind generation towers, within a 2-mile radius of our home. And so we moved up here to Yankton to get away from. And back in Wayne County, they started signing lease contracts back there in about 10 years, over 10 years ago, I think. People weren't aware of it till they came around. They tried to get me to sign a contract, and originally we were thinking about it, but then I found out about a lot of the negative things that are involved with them, with noise and property evaluation around them, acreages and homes, those kinds of things. And I just felt that we didn't have the right to put anything on our property that would devalue our neighbors' homes. In our neighborhood, we're about 15 miles from Norfolk. There are a lot of acreages that people work in Norfolk and around that aren't farmers. And the devaluation of property, studies done throughout the United States, back about 2 or 3 miles from the wind turbine is the loss of value usually on the homes. So we decided not to put them in. And 1 mile south of our home, they had a 2,500-foot setback in Wayne County. And a mile south of our home, there were 4 of them right in the road, section line, right on the road. So you had 4 of them in about 3,700 feet. And those made a lot of noise and were really irritating. And at night, the red lights, it's like living on the side of a Christmas tree. There's 200 and some towers around us, and all red lights, beautiful blinking red lights. And one of the developments was from Sweden, and they had promised, one of the companies, that all of their lights would be turned off, and the only time that they would come on and flash would be when any kind of an aircraft approached within a certain number of feet. They would have safety devices on the turbines that would turn the lights on to warn the aircraft. But otherwise, they would all be off. Well, that was just a big lie. When they put them in, the red lights were on. And the solar, if they're going to go with green energy, and they're bound in turn to do it, solar takes about 20% the property usage as wind turbines, taking farmland out of production. So you've got 20% of what the solar farms do. So if you're up here, if it's going to happen, try to push the solar versus the wind. And the battery storage systems and stuff for solar is so much more developed than for a wind turbine system. And the whole green energy thing, you know, a lot of the people, I know a lot of people that signed up for them, friends of mine did and stuff, but people aren't unaware of the whole green energy movement throughout the world. One of the things that they hate the most is ethanol. They want to see the end of ethanol production. That's one of their biggest, on their top 10 list of what they want to do. And I read an article about 2 years ago from an economist from the University of Illinois, and he said that 40% of the increase in farmland values throughout the corn growing area of the United States is directly attributable to the ethanol industry and raising the price of corn throughout the Midwest. So if these people keep getting our way and pushing to more green energy and more green energy, outlawing the use of combustion engines in cars and pickups, and force us down that road, ethanol will die. And logically, if that economist from the University of Illinois was right about a an increase in farmland of 40% because of ethanol, if you take ethanol away, logically, farmland would decrease 40% in value. And like, if you live in a more sparsely populated area of Nebraska like I did, the primary source of revenue to run the school system is property taxes off farmland. So if you take 40% or 50% out of farmland values away, let's say over the next 10 years, it's going to be absolutely devastating to these rural school districts that don't have a tax base that takes revenue from factories and apartment houses and those type of things that the bigger towns like Sioux Falls does. So, and another thing, I don't know how far north of town are they going to be? I've heard different stories. You know, I don't know, 10 miles?
The county goes, is it 20 miles north? It's at least 3 townships. So we're talking Yankton County, anywhere in Yankton County is what we are discussing.
So is there a proposed project at this time?
That I
Okay.
can't confirm.
Because I know that, you know, a prime source of income up in this country is the tourist industry and all of the businesses around the lake and in Yankton and stuff. And in Italy, they built a lot of wind turbines in rural areas that were smaller Italian towns that were maybe 50% of the income in these small Italian towns came from tourists. And once the wind turbine systems were in, the tourist industry just died because people didn't want to go vacation around these big, huge towers, even in these beautiful little hotels and stuff, you know. So it could hurt the economy around Yankton if you get the turbines too close. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Randy, were there any other people besides you that left that area?
There was 2 other people. They were renters and they moved out. The rented acreages. You know, and we're into our 3rd year up here in Yankton County living here. I'm not on top of what they sold as far as acreages and people moving away from towers.
Okay. Are there any other public comments?
Yeah. Unless there's some more.
Nope. Go ahead and come up, sir.
Okay.
Please, when you get to the microphone, please state your name.
Okay, I need 4, so,
Are you our speaker?
Yeah, this is our
Oh,
speaker. This is
okay.
Doug Nelson,
I
yes.
was gonna say,
okay.
You're on the agenda, so you get different.
Anybody else need to speak?
I would.
Good.
okay.
3 minutes, right?
We try for 3 minutes, yes.
My name's Craig Bartles. I live at Belden, Nebraska. I'm a county commissioner in Cedar County, Nebraska. We experienced the wind tower situation in our county, and I don't remember what our setbacks were at the beginning, but at the end, we changed our setbacks to 1 mile, and I believe it should have been 2. I live 5 miles from Wayne County. Wayne County does not have zoning, Cedar County does. I feel sorry for one couple that moved from Dakota County out to the Wayne-Cedar County line to be out in the peace and quiet. And they just bought an acreage. The guy that owns the rest of the farm put a tower, it's 1,300 feet from his house, something like that. I told the wind tower people that were wanting to come into Cedar County that Wayne County and the wind tower people needed to go to these people and buy their property, because what they did to that family was made it 0 value. 0. The lady that lives there said, I said, well, what's it like? And she said, well, there's just like a truck coming up the road all the time, only the truck never goes by. It's just always coming up the road. And it's really sad, in my opinion. Doug Nelson. Doug helped us on that deal. There's very few people that know more about the negative aspects of wind towers than Doug Nelson.
Thank you.
So he's a very important part of you guys understanding this. My 3 minutes up?
Somewhere in there. I didn't officially
what else?
keep track.
I live 5 miles from towers. I've been down there at 9 o'clock at night. I've been down there at 11 o'clock at night. I've went back at 6:30 in the morning when they, in my opinion, make the most noise and cause the most problem. When the wind's really blowing, you won't notice them that much because the wind's blowing. All you hear is the wind. But when they're searching for wind and turning, and they're trying to turn to find the direction of the wind, and they're turning their blades. I don't know if any of you have ever been around the older grain carts. When they fold the auger, they go kaboom. That's the sound you hear every time those turbines are turning and searching for air. And you don't know that till you go out there and spend 2 or 3 hours listening to them. And then you realize what the people that live near them go through. I could go on, but thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll close public comment unless we have anything else. Public comment is closed. And we have a speaker, Doug Nelson. So I'm sorry, I don't have an official introduction for you.
Okay, thank you.
If you could speak into a microphone somewhere, if you turn that one on and there you go, that'll work.
Okay,
It should pick you up from that distance.
okay, well, how's that? That okay? Or, can I speak loud enough? Can I speak loud enough in here without the mic?
As long as it's sitting on the table.
That, you'll be fine, you're perfect.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna need this thing. But to start with, my name's Doug Nelson. I'm from Wayne, Nebraska, and about 15 years ago, I'm a farmer from Wayne, Nebraska, and about 15 or so years ago, thereabouts, I got interested in wind turbines personally. A high school friend of mine was selling them, and he was the big man on campus. He was the football quarterback and, highly regarded guy. Here he come. And he told me he'd done some research and that one of my farms was on a ridge near the Northeast Nebraska Experiment Farm, had really favorable wind because of that, and a real good situation as far as the grid went, because right down the middle of that section on the south side of my quarter was a high voltage transmission line. And on the north side was a normal utility line with 3-phase power. I had an irrigation system on that, but the 2 corners on the south were kind of sandy, not too productive. So that'd be a great place to build a couple of windmills. So, of course, I was just overwhelmed. I wanted to be the first guy, and I'm gonna make all this money because the wind is free. And I'm gonna use it to run my irrigation system and pump water. And the rest of the time, I'm gonna sell it to the grid. And I talked to the power company. They would buy the first 10 megawatts of capacity at retail price. And it was an arrangement called net metering. So this is all in my favor. I'm getting paid retail price, and if I need it, I can buy it back for retail price. And I didn't need a developer like NextEra or Haystack or any of them other companies in our area. I was going to be the guy. Okay, so you got the point. So now we're talking about price. And we're not talking about these great big turbines they build today. These were the smaller version back then. And he told me the price, and I said, Dave, I don't need a calculator to tell you this is not going to work, because I already knew what it cost to run my irrigation system annually. Oh, you don't understand, he said. 80% of this at that time was covered by gifts, grants, subsidies, tax credits, and net metering. And just for an example, I tore this page out of a recent magazine, and this quoted a new 40% federal tax credit, and that probably came in with the new Inflation Act. That had a lot of higher subsidies for renewable energy. Okay, so a 40% federal tax credit on this thing, a 50% USDA grant with Section 179 depreciation. Man. Okay, I'm going to explain about a tax credit here for a minute. Right up front, 40% federal tax credit. And keep this in mind, because it goes over the head of a lot of people. A tax credit and a subsidy, or a cash subsidy, are two different things, you know. If you receive a tax credit for something and you are in the 0% tax bracket, it's virtually worthless to you because you don't have any taxes to use it on. The magnitude or the value of a tax credit is directly related to the magnitude of your tax bracket. Let me pick on somebody. Do we have any accountants here? Any tax people here? This guy right here, he's closest. I'm going to pick on him. Let's just say, for instance, you had a good year and you had a $2 million taxable income, put you in the 50% tax bracket. You're looking at a $1 million tax liability, right? You need to write a check for $1 million. Now, that's not going to be very much fun. But let's say I come along and say, what's your name? Mike, I got a deal for you. I could give you a $1 million tax credit here, or on the other hand, I could give you another $2 million worth of taxable cash. Which one of them are you going to take? And if you take one, I'm going to take the other one. We'll run the numbers both ways, and we're going to figure this out, okay? Which one do you want? Okay, this is a cash man. He's going to take the other two. Now he's got $4 million. But he's in the 50% tax bracket. He's got to write a check for $2 million. He's going to have $2 million in the bank now, cleaned up money, tax-free money, all his. I, on the other hand, I'm in the same situation. I got a $2 million income. He took the cash. The only thing I got left is a tax credit, the $1 million tax credit. Well, guess what? I owe $1 million, so I use the $1 million tax credit to pay my taxes. I, too, have $2 million in the bank when I get done paying my taxes. I used a $1 million tax credit, and he used $2 million worth of cash. So the balancing point is the 50% tax bracket, high as you can get. A $1 million tax credit is exactly equal to an additional $2 million worth of taxable cash. It's the same thing. And so that's why subsidies come into these things in the form of tax credits. You see, a tax credit is an off-the-books transaction for the government. They don't send you a check, therefore they don't have to account for taxes created or collected to cover the check they wrote, because they don't write a check. They send you a credit. It's a credit against a non-deductible expense, namely taxes. Therefore, it's like tax-free money. They don't send you a check, therefore you don't get a 1099. It's tax-free money. That's huge for a company, a huge company that makes lots and lots of money, that owes lots and lots of taxes. And that's one good reason why these great big trillion-dollar companies many times don't pay much for taxes. It's all legal, but they're most likely collecting tax credits for something. So there's that point. I needed to explain that anyway. Now let me get back to my story. I told Dave that this isn't going to work, and he told me about all these subsidies and everything. Well, you're looking at $1 million expense. 40% federal tax credit would be $400,000 on the face value. However, in reality, in terms of money, the way we talk about money in the pre-tax form, when we're at the coffee shop or we're at the banker, we talk about money, dollars and cents, but it's all in the pre-tax form. If you correct this to terms of money that we work with today, that $1 million investment with a 40% credit, tax credit, which most people would grab $400,000 off of that thing, it's really worth $800,000 in terms of pre-tax dollars. So you come over here and you got a 50% grant. Well, gee whiz, that takes its $1 million investment down to $500,000 right off the bat. And you've got a tax credit that's worth $800. You're starting to get the idea how this works. And then, if you depreciate it on Part 179, you could write the whole thing off in 1 year. So that $1 million investment you made, fully depreciated, is going to save you, assuming you're in the 50% tax bracket, $500,000 worth of taxes. That's why these guys are very well educated, they're very good salesmen, and they can get people to sign leases. So I'll move on. Well, no, I'm going to step back just a little bit in my story. I had this net metering arrangement with the Wayne County Public Power at the time. I did not go through with this project, but net metering means they buy my extra power for retail price. And then they take it over to Mike's place here and sell it to him for retail price. No profit realized on the transaction that involves the power that they're buying from me. But when the ice storm comes and takes down the power lines, they're out there at 3 a.m. and putting them back up, get the power going again. It costs them, I don't know how much, lots of money, triple overtime probably. When they have their board meeting, the next board meeting, they say, man, that ice storm cost us a lot of money. We got to take out a loan here for a while. And that means making payments on it. So they send a notice out to everybody in the district and say, due to the ice storm, we have to raise our rates. So I get a postcard too. As soon as I read the rates are going up, I pick up the phone, call my buddy Dave, say, hey, rates went up. Let's build another windmill. So it's kind of a formula to make the price of electricity go higher. That's just one example. The other example is this. That one dried up. Let's try a green one. There we go. We're going to draw a graph. The problem with wind turbines and irrigation is when I need to irrigate, which is July and August, everything's hot. There's no real good reason for wind to blow because everything's the same temperature, nothing coming up, nothing coming down, Everything's pretty hot, just baking, Wind turbine's not going to turn. Spray planes come out and fly around because we're spraying insecticide and fungicide that time of year. So it's handy for those guys. Okay, keep that thought in mind. This is a chart, a graph. I'm going to draw the base load demand for power. It fluctuates a little bit, but the base load is the power we use every day of the year, regardless of the season. You turn on the lights, you're going to use the stove, and the refrigerator runs, and the base load. A coal plant handles this very nicely because they start them up, get them hot, turn those turbines, and they sell everything they produce, furnishing the base load. It's cheap and efficient and dependable. Okay, the problem in our area comes in the summertime when air conditioners and fans and irrigation we have a peak here in the summer, comes up like that, peaks out for a couple of weeks and starts tapering back down. This here gets to be very expensive electricity because they gotta generate it, but they don't get to sell it for only about 2 weeks. So the spread here between this expensive electricity at the peak and the cheap electricity here at the base load establishes the price that we pay, because they've got to have a couple of gas plants on standby here to fire up quickly and get us over the peak until we start cooling back off again. So the gas plants are in place, they're on standby, and but here's the problem. Here's our cheap electricity. Keep in mind, you hear it all the time, we gotta narrow the spread. They say run at night or run in the morning when it's cooler or something, so we can lower this peak here. Lower the narrower that spread, the cheaper our electricity is. That's what they're trying to accomplish. So, okay, now I've got wind turbines in this mix. In March and April and May, when we don't have a very high demand for electricity, April and May, we got a lot of wind there because we're having a temperature change. So the turbines are running. In the PURPA law, Public Utilities Commission, says that the utilities must buy the renewable energy first. So, okay, the wind is blowing, they're buying power from me now. There we go. So I'm lowering the sales, I'm lowering the base load for the coal plant. But it takes him 8 to 12 hours, sometimes a day or two, depending how big that coal plant is. He's got to keep scooping coal. And while the wind is blowing, he just shoots his steam that he uses to run the turbines out into the cooling pond. That's why when you go by a coal plant and you see all this steam, that's what he's doing. His demand is not there at the moment, but he can't shut this thing off. He's got to keep it hot because tomorrow the wind might die down and then he'll be out of the market, and so will we. We'll be out of lights. So now the wind is blowing. I'm lowering this base load here. Now July and August comes, and the money that I put in the bank from selling my power to the power company, I get out of the bank and I come back with my demand here with my pivots. I'm raising the peak and I'm lowering the base load. I have just widened the spread here than what we had. And the wider the spread, the higher the price of electricity, if you can get it. Now let's say Mike here has a coal plant, and he's getting about retirement age, you know, but he's made a good living before the wind turbine showed up. And every 15 years or so, he's got to overhaul this plant, keep it up to specs. But now he's putting up with this kind of stuff, and he's not selling all of his electricity. He has no choice except raise his price, stay in business, or go into a situation called planned obsolescence. And when you're at retirement age, why not? You know, I'm due 7 more years, I'm due for a multi-million-dollar overhaul anyway. When we get to that point, I'm pulling the plug. Shut off. No more coal plant. What are you gonna do then? Turbines? Solar? There's times when both the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, like early in the morning, a lot of times. When it's the coolest, you know, and you go out and spray early in the morning because the wind isn't blowing. Who are we going to lean on? The problem with turbines is it produces undependable energy. It's not only undependable because you can't depend on the wind, it's inconsistent because the wind isn't steady, it's gusty. So the wind turbines produce AC power, But pure AC power is a sine wave. Real nice sine wave I'm going to try to draw here. There you go. That's AC power. The frequency here and here and here, that all has to match perfectly. And the wavelength and the frequency and this wave angle, that all has to match perfectly for our electric motors to run properly. Three-phase, for instance, is 3 phases of power 60 degrees apart. And that creates a 360-degree magnetism around the rotor in an electric motor. And this three-phase power has to be perfect. And here's how it looks. There's your first phase. And here's your first phase. And here's your third phase. This don't look too bad here, but you got 3 phases and they don't dare tangle up with each other. Yeah, they're going like this, the next one's like that, the next one's 60 degrees over. You run that through an electric motor and that thing just hums. So the problem with turbines is that with the gusty wind and the variable and the multitude of turbines, one turbine might be putting out a sine wave like this, and then he gets to doing something like that, and all those turbines have just a few degrees of manufacturing tolerances, So none of them throw out a sine wave of AC power that will match the grid. So the very next step here is that this inconsistent and substandard sine wave has to be converted to DC power. Here, DC, direct current, DC power, just like that. What you have in your car, 12 volt DC. However, your alternator in your car generates AC and goes through a rectifier and a diode trio in there, and it comes out of there like this. So then this is what you call converting AC to DC, and then you invert DC back to a modified form of AC power, and roughly it comes out looking like this. And they got equipment now. Whoops, this goes like this. Yeah, and if you stand back far enough and look at a digital picture, you don't see the pixels, you see the picture. Well, if you stand back far enough, you can see a wave here. See the wave? Well, this is an exaggeration of what it is. It's really a series of little tiny steps, Just little tiny steps. They got that purified pretty close. But if you run this through a computer, it don't like it. Lights don't seem to bother it. Electric motors don't like it either, because it runs with a vibration when the motor is looking for a nice smooth wave. You got a little deal here where it don't know whether it wants to run forward or backwards. So you get this little high-pitched vibration. So you go down to the hardware store, and you buy a refrigerator, brand new refrigerator, and it says $250 tax credit, energy efficient. It just so happens it takes 10 or 15% more of this to equal something like this. So you get your tax credit and it runs, pretty good. But gosh, darn thing don't work anymore. When did we get that? Can't quite remember. Wasn't too many years ago. So you take it to the landfill, you go get another one. You see, we need good, dependable, cheap, pure power to run this country. I was snowed in on my farm for 3 days a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, I got a generator, but it's over in the shed 4 miles away. I got an electric furnace and a heat pump, sort of a deal that I'd never buy again. But boy, I sure didn't want that power to go off. So what I'm saying is, dependable electricity is priceless. Let's say you had a situation. Maybe your wife was having problems, or the kids were sick or something. It's 3 o'clock, the roads are blocked, and you need that electricity, because we don't live in teepees anymore. we kinda need this stuff. We've got ourselves to depending on it, and that's risky. So, that is that. I wanna run a little bit of the economics through. Oh, I got another deal. I'm gonna talk fast, but I got another deal. Back in that day when I was thinking about being a wind turbine guy, I talked to the electrical engineer at our power company, and he said, I gotta tell you something. These tax credits on electricity at that time were, they were 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, we work with kilowatts, and we're familiar with kilowatts and kilowatt hours. Most of these turbines talk in megawatts. A megawatt is simply 1,000 kilowatts. So if I was talking a megawatt here, this would be $23. But anyway, here's the setup. It's hot, it's dry, just bacon, no wind. Power lines are just vibrating. They're just hot, you know. Power going everywhere. Pivots are running, fans for livestock are running, and people are going down to the hardware store, buying another air conditioner, putting in the bedroom, plugging that in the wall, trying to, you know. So you get the idea. We're peeking out, and we're right at the edge. The engineer is up all night long. He's watching the gauges, you know. Man, I hope we don't have to go to a rolling blackout here. But there's a cold front coming from the northwest, and he's watching the weather. We might get a rain tonight. By golly, about 3 o'clock in the morning, boom, thunderstorm. Couple inches of rain. Next morning, clears up. Front goes by, northwest wind comes in right behind it. Wind turbines are going around and around. The wind turbine guy calls the engineer and says, hey, I hear you're a little short of power. Yeah, you should have called me yesterday. And he just hangs up. He's been all night long, you know, he's a little crabby. Okay, well, the wind guy understands. But the next morning, the wind's blowing harder yet. And it's cool and everything. Base load, we're clear down to the base load. The windmill guy says, hey, don't hang up. I got a deal for you. We got so much electricity out here, we don't know what to do with it. I got a deal. Can you just take this power? We'll pay you $0.015 a kilowatt hour to take this power. The engineer says, well, what do you want me to do with it? I don't have any demand. But then he goes over to the wall and he sees this power line. You got a power line here and it goes into a great big substation here with a fence around it. And he's got a switch here and he's got another line coming in it, another over here. And he says, you know what, I don't need that sub today. So he opens this switch and he opens this switch and he closes this switch. Windmill brings his power right in here. And then he takes it out the back and down to the ground. And he's making $0.015 a kilowatt to do it. This is hypothetical, but this is what this engineer told me. And they can afford to do it because you and I, through the government, are giving these wind turbines 2.3 cents a kilowatt hour to generate the stuff in a production tax credit. And this is not just 2.3 cents because it's a tax credit. It's really worth 4.6 cents to somebody in the 50% tax bracket. And a tax credit for somebody means taxes they don't have to pay, means taxes that all the rest of us must pay to make up the difference. Either that or the debt has to go up. So that's what you gotta remember, because a tax credit is, you know, these investors are huge money people. It's worth more than the face value to them. And so that was that. I'm going to do a little cash flow for you. I got an article here. Take my word for it. It's going to take me time to dig it out unless it's laying right here. Here's what the article said. It was featuring Warren Buffett's Mid-American Energy in Iowa. And it quoted how many megawatts of electricity that he had and what it cost to build them. It cost over $12 billion to build 4,951 or something like that. I got the article, but I got the calculator out, and it turned out that it was 2.4 million per megawatt. 2.4 million per megawatt, put a comma there. And, well, I can do something with that. I know what it costs. But I don't know what this all included. I know for sure, well, you can imagine that it wouldn't include road damage. When they put them turbines in east of Wayne, Highway 15 north of Wayne was annihilated. The west half of that road, the highway is supposed to have a nice crown to it, you know. Okay. The west half looked like a W. You know, and I had one of my guys went across the highway to mow the road east of the highway, and he hit this hole and this hole. His back wheels of the tractor dropped in this about the same time that the tail wheel of the mower was coming up out of this hole, and it unhitched that. They twisted so bad it unhooked one side of that mower off the tractor, and he got about a half mile down the road and called me and said, I can't get this thing hooked back up. This road was completely rebuilt after they built the wind farm east of me. So this cost most likely is not attributed in this cost. There's a lot of expenses that probably are not attributed to that cost. You can think about it. You got depreciation. You got office expense of all kinds. I made a list of them here. Well, first of all, you got to get a lease signed. That costs you money. It costs you attorneys. Sometimes I do better without notes here.
Where's Ginger at? Your secretary?
She's getting ready for a trip. So anyway, I can do this, but let's do a cash flow on this. 10-year depreciation. Let's go 10% of that, be $240,000. Right? Is 10% depreciation a reasonable number to depreciate a machine? And I'm going off of IRS standards here. Yeah, got a tractor, could depreciate over 10 years, about right. Well, back in the day when I did this, interest was 3%. And 3% interest on this happens to be $72,000. There's 3% interest. And I just calculated 1% for property tax, just a nice number, pretty close. 1% would be $24,000. I figured 1%, okay, this is insurance. And I figured another 1%, another $24,000 for taxes. I figured 5% for repairs. And I haven't had any attorneys argue with these percentages. This is repairs. That would be about $120,000, yeah. There's $120,000. Labor, they break down, you gotta fix them. 5% for labor, that would be another $120,000. For labor, 5% labor. Rent to the landowner, landowner, I picked $10,000 per megawatt. Reasonable, I think. Legal fees, I just grabbed a number, said $5,000 per megawatt. And then a big thing, standby power. Who pays for the standby power when these turbines are not running? Our lights stay on, there's something standing by to keep us going, thankfully. But that all gets billed into the rates we pay, so the consumers are paying for standby power. I, for instance, know what standby power costs me on an irrigator that I must run around the clock. I've got one well and 2 pivots, and there are situations where I cannot keep up. I gotta run it around the clock, on peak, off peak, all the time. I've gotta pay, at the time it was $88 a horsepower, extra, upfront premium to keep the standby generators maintained and ready to go. So, I did some calculations based on what a megawatt is and what the horsepower of my motor was, and I matched them up. If they pay the same rate for standby power I do as an irrigator, it'll cost them about another $120,000. So I put that on here. That cost should be attributed to the wind turbine guys, not us consumers. This total here is $735,000. $735,000. Okay, that's annual based expense. This is reasonable, don't you think? 3% interest is more than reasonable today. Insurance at 1%, not too bad. Taxes at 1%, not too bad. Repairs, 5%, nothing wrong with that. Labor, another 5%, nothing wrong with that. I know they're paying the farmers at least $10,000 per megawatt, if not more. Attorneys, standby power. And that's it. There's lots of expenses that I didn't mention, like raptor counts and biologists that they've hired, and there's just a lot of expenses involved with this. You gotta maintain the roads going up to them. Go ahead.
Parts? You figure parts in there and all?
Well, I got repairs and labor.
All right, I got
You know, when you take your pickup to the shop, you ever notice that you look at the parts and then you look at the labor, and a lot of times they're about the same? Am I right? You know, anybody ever notice that? Well, that's why I did this. Okay, now we know what it's gonna cost us in the absence of subsidies. Let's do a little cash flow on a megawatt that cost us this much money. Now you can quibble with this, but I'll bet it's more per megawatt today than it was back in 2018 when I did these calculations. Now remember, a megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts. So 1 megawatt equal 1,000 kilowatts. And I also know a guy named Phil Clements. He was the Next Era project manager for the Shoals project west of me about 8 miles. I debated him at a commissioner meeting and we got to be friends afterwards. Highly respectable guy. We respect each other. I asked him some questions and I said, Phil, what do you sell your power for? He said, we got a long-term contract with Omaha Public Power. That's a key word I'm going to get to, public. With, they will buy all our production for $1.50 a kilowatt hour. That is wholesale price. That's kind of cheap. But Omaha Public Power never knows when it's available. The wind might be blowing now, but not then. So they made a deal. I'll give you $1.50 kilowatt hour. And that's what Phil told me, and I believe the man is correct. So, next thing I asked him is, how efficient are your turbines? He said, well, they're 40%. And I said, oh, I don't know. I've never read a turbine yet that's 40% efficient, but let's just say they are. That means this megawatt running for 1 hour will generate at 100% efficiency 1 megawatt or 1,000 kilowatt hours in an hour. It was running at 100%, but Phil said they run at 40%. That means 400 kilowatt hours per hour, kilowatt hours. Okay, that's what this thing will produce at 40% efficiency. So, 400, not 400,000, 400. So 400, if they're worth $0.015 a piece to Omaha Public Power, which is 0.015, cents. That's $6 per hour that this thing is producing. Okay? There's 8,760 hours in a year. You take this times 8,760, assuming we could do that, 365, and you get about $52,561 production of electricity per year. Okay? What's this number? Do your own calculations, but these are questions that gotta be asked. This is all hypothetical. This is a hypothetical cash flow based on normal IRS acceptable expenses. And I haven't scratched the surface. There's only 9 expenses here. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of expenses involved with these things. So that's one point. The cash flow isn't there, and it comes back in the form of tax credits and grants and depreciation. And I probably, since I never got involved with it, other than just looking into it, I don't know how far the government involvement gets, but, okay.
And then tax credits start over every time the wind farm's sold, correct?
Oh, yes, okay. Well, I just thought of something else I want to point out. The entities that own these deals are usually LLCs. LLC stands for Limited Liability Company. It does not necessarily mean that they are not liable for or responsible for liability. It just simply means that the LLC doesn't have enough money in here to cover any major liabilities. That's why you use an LLC to insulate the main company. So let's go back to the Wayne project. It's called Rattlesnake Creek today. Initially, when it started, it was called Tradewind. Now, Tradewind is a Kansas City-based corporation and a subsidiary of Enel. The initials, I'm not sure what they stand for, E-N-E-L. Enel is based in Rome, Italy. It's a global corporation. So they created a subsidiary in the United States in Kansas City called Tradewind. Okay, that's a nice name. So these guys started a wind project around Allen and Wakefield, Emerson area, and then after a few years, they went to the Wayne Airport Authority with an idea. Said, guys, you got a non-directional navigational beacon called an NDB at the Wayne Airport. It's an old obsolete navigational beacon that dates back towards World War II. GPS has pretty much made them obsolete. However, the one at Wayne still worked. But Tradewind said, we'd like you to take that out. We can build closer and taller to the Wayne Airport with our turbines if you do not have an NDB here, because the federal aviation regulations say with a navigational beacon like this, you gotta have structures so far back and they can only be so high. So they offered them $500,000 to take that thing out. And it was so much money, it just shocked them. So they politely asked the guy to, said, okay, we'll take it under consideration. And after the guy went home, they kicked him around a little bit. One guy said, well, boy, that came out of the blue, I wonder what they're up to. He said, why don't we invite him back and try him at $1 million? Another guy said, well, if you want $1 million, let's go for 1.5, in case we have to back up a little bit. So they voted and they said, okay, that'll be a deal. We'll take that thing out. So, they invited me back to one of the next meetings, said we've kicked it around a little bit. We decided we could take that out, but we want $1.5 million to do it. Okay, he goes over to his briefcase, gets a contract, writes it out. And I got the paperwork, at least on the down payment, he wrote out a check for $300,000 that night. Or, that's what I understand, he wrote it out for that night, and I got a document in that black case over there to prove it. And so that NDB disappeared, and they didn't tell us pilots. I've got a plane, I got it in a hangar there, and I'm flying into Wayne. It was kind of easy like it was today, and I think Wayne's over there. I'm gonna check, see if I'm right, you know, and tune in my ADF in my airplane to pick up the NDB beacon and find myself back home. It didn't work. So I asked one of the guys, what's the matter with the NDB? I couldn't make it work today, it wasn't working. Well, we took that out. I said, well, how come you didn't tell us? And so, you know, a few people started grumping and growling around a little bit. They gave the instrument pilots $10,000 credit on their hangar, and they gave us private pilots $5,000 credit hangar rent. So we had to pay hangar rent for a while, you know, to stay quiet. But the city of Wayne, through the airport authority, picked up $1.5 million, a little over a year when they got their wind farm completed. But I don't know for sure when Tradewind initiated their project, but what I've read is that the statute of limitation on depreciation recapture expires in 5 years. In other words, if you build a wind project, have it fully depreciated, and you know, this was something like a $430 million project. Depreciation on that would be worth $215 million. That's a lot of money. You don't want to have to pay that back, so you own it for 5 years and 1 day, then sell it. So that's what these guys did. Coincidentally, shortly after the NDB disappeared, Tradewind sold their project to a new company called Rattlesnake Creek. Rattlesnake. So, I assume these guys took the depreciation out of it, took the tax credits out of it, and sold it to this company now. Based on the sales price, these guys can do the same thing. But these guys own these guys. Who do you think owns this company? Who do you think? Yeah? Right here.
Yeah.
Isn't that sweet? And it's legal. But you remember, a tax credit is tax-free money? That's leaving the country, going to Italy. Same thing here. Leaving the country, going to Italy. Because these guys own both companies. That's legal. Now,
So if the county or the owner of the land that has the wind tower on it has a battle with them for whatever reason, they're trying to deal with attorneys in Italy, right?
well, okay, so you've got a lease, and I got copies of several of them here. If you sign a lease and you have problems, first you gotta go to the LLC that signed this lease. And that LLC might not be the same person anymore that you signed the lease with, because they sell them like commodities. So, first of all, you gotta break the LLC, then you gotta go to the company that owns the LLC, and you might have to have an attorney license for foreign law, in this case, Italy. You're not gonna get it. You sign one of these things, you're at high risk. I got a picture here, it's the only picture I got about some old wind turbines. Barry, you wanna pass it around? Look here, we'll go this way first. wingtip vortices for just a minute. And how they kill birds. So here's a turbine. And here we got a big old blade. And here we got a great big blade. And here we got another great big blade. And they're working. And over here we got an eagle. And they like to point their head in the wind and just kind of float, look for a little mouse, you know, and if they can't find one, they'll just make a great big U-turn and come back over here and look for a mouse. And they'll make another one, and pretty soon clump, you know, the blades. But the blades are not, in my opinion, from what I've read, are not the biggest killer of the birds. Behind these blades is a vacuum. And it creates lift like the wing of an airplane. Anyway, you have 3 horizontal tornadoes spinning off of each one of these blades here, and they're called vortices. Now imagine them 3 twisted like a rope, and spray planes don't like them. What we have inside here is very low air pressure inside these little loops created by the vacuum behind the blade. And then the high pressure air around it is rushing to get into this vacuum. So if you're a bird and your flock of birds flying through behind these turbines, you'll encounter these things. They're all twisted up. You'll hit a high pressure and a low pressure and a high pressure and a low pressure and lots of turbulence. And it's possible that you could hit inside these a low barometric pressure lower than what your lungs have in them when you're trying to inhale, and instead of inhaling, the air will actually come out of your lungs if this pressure out here is actually lower than what you're creating in your lungs when you lower your diaphragm. It'll suck the air right out of you. And so all of a sudden you got air coming out of you, and then you hit one of these high pressure, and it's going right back in. And you get high, and you get low, and you high and low, and those birds are built pretty light, and it collapses their lungs, and down they come, and when they bump their head, it's usually the end of the road. And they pick them up, and they can't see anything wrong with them. Because these vortices, apparently, that are getting them. There was a study done in England on badgers. And badgers, pretty stubborn. You build a windmill, he says, I ain't going anywhere. I'm staying right here no matter what. Well, they put some barbed wire or something down the hole to collect some hair. And then where they're way off somewhere where there was no turbines, they did the same thing with the local badgers, and they compared hair samples. And the ones living next to the turbines had much higher cortisol levels in them, that's a stress hormone, than the badgers living over here. So, what does that tell you? I live northwest of Wayne, about 10 miles. The nearest turbine is about 4 miles away from my place, and I can hear them once in a while. But I swear I can feel the vibrations at night when the ground is cold, when it's really froze. I got a steel framed house with a poured concrete basement, and I swear I can feel the vibrations of those things. When all these blades here come thumping past this, if they happen to get in time, they've got this great big foundation here, and it kind of comes up to a peak here a little bit, that these things are bolted down to. And that vibration of this blade coming by this tower here gets transferred down into this concrete, and if the ground is froze, hard telling how far it goes. Some people can feel it, some people can't, but I gotta believe it when they say they can feel it. Here is some pictures, probably not enough for all of you here. Pass them around, take a look, and feel free to take them home with you, but there's not enough to go around. That is a picture of wind turbines after the wind came up and blew the fog through the blades. And now you can see the vortices, what I'm talking about right here. So you can pass them around. Okay, leases. This lease was written by a company called Haystack. And I believe Haystack is a trade wind company, I believe. You know, Randy? Well, Haystack's an LLC. And
Haystack ended up being sold to a Norwegian company.
it got sold to Orsted.
Yeah.
Yep. So these guys,
A lot of these companies are from outside the United States that are developing.
yeah, okay, so these guys got bought out by Orsted, but that's the one just to the west, that was just east of you, wasn't it? Okay.
That's the last one, the last
All right.
part of the.
So I'm gonna read you a couple lines here. Does everybody understand what a lessor is and a lessee is? Okay, the lessor is the owner of the land. The lessee is the person that just leased the land. It says lessee shall have possession of the property. But that's not a period, it's just a comma. For the following wind energy uses, as lessee may determine by lessee or third party. That's pretty broad. You can go on the other page, and there's a whole paragraph defining what wind operations are. It's very vague. It could be almost anything. But when you sign one of these, you're signing your whole legal description to the wind company. And they might say they want to put a turbine, you know, there's your farm. They might say they want to put a turbine over here, and maybe someday, you know, one over here. And their driveway might come in here and follow a ridge, because they like to keep them driveways high on the ridge so the snow blows off. And then they'll bring their driveway over to here. And then maybe the neighbor has a turbine over here, so they'll go over here like this. Okay, what do you think just happened to the efficiency of operations on a normal agricultural farm here? You know, you gotta come and turn around for this, and then you gotta patch this in here, or whatever you gotta do. It just doesn't seem to me like signing one of these leases is gonna be good for the property values. I got another deal I wanna pass around. And I think I only made 12 of them, but look at this. I'm gonna keep one of these for my talk here. This is a construction lien filed in Saline County, Nebraska. This is a copy right off the legal document. This construction lien was filed on 99 tracts of real estate down there. People that had signed these leases, okay, and it was for $30,852,000. Filed on 99 pieces of land. Milligan One Wind LLC apparently did not pay or got into some kind of a disagreement with IEA Constructors, and IEA Constructors filed a construction lien on the real estate on 99 tracts of real estate. So if you had a wind lease and went down to your banker to borrow operating money, and he says, well, I'm gonna have a hard time using your farm for collateral because it's been encumbered with a construction lien. Now, what's that gonna do to the value of your deed? And if it takes the value of your deed down, what's that gonna do to the valuation of your farm at the courthouse? And correspondingly so, what's it gonna do to your property taxes? Then what's the municipality's gonna do if they're counting on these property taxes coming in, and all of a sudden they're not there? And this farmer can't get the money to operate because of this lien. Those are questions. This happened. It's since been released, I understand, but this actually happened. This is a document that was filed at the courthouse. We gotta remember that these wind turbines are not owned generally by public power companies. These are private companies, mostly based offshore. China has got wind companies over here through LLCs and other entities operating. And of course, if you have something you own privately, you kind of have the right to do with it what you want. So let's say that you have a Chinese wind farm over here, and a Chinese wind farm over here, and a couple way over there. And it's hard to trace down the owners because of all the entities in between. But like earlier, I told you we depend on electricity. So if we have foreign entities that don't like the United States, and we got the southern border wide open, why don't we just wait till the summer hits and we're peaking out? And a couple of coal plants, he just closed his coal plant, and the gas plants can't quite keep up. And we kind of depend now, because we've got so many wind turbines, we're depending on them. And the private entity just pulls plug.
Does that happen?
Well, not yet. But wouldn't you think that would be a real smart way if you was going to conquer a country rather than firing a whole bunch of bullets to shut their pull plug on them? You know, cell phones would quit, computers would quit, everything else would shut down, it'd just stop. We live on electricity, we depend on electricity. I think we better not waste any money building something that's undependable, because dependable energy is priceless, undependable energy is simply worthless. If you can't depend on it, what good is it? Nothing, zero.
So, sir, we're an hour into your presentation, and I want to make sure we have time for questions and stuff too. So I didn't know how much more material you needed to cover.
You know, I've done 3 hours before.
Oh, well, we're meeting is supposed to go to 6 o'clock, which is 35 minutes from now, and we have some other things to discuss. So I didn't know if you could maybe condense what you've got left so we have time for questions.
Okay, I've tried to condense as much as I can along the way. I got another different kind of a tax credit I would like to mention here. They like to build wind farms out here in the Midwest. First of all, there's not quite as much opposition as there is trying to build them in California. But there's another deal. If you build a wind farm out here in the Midwest, in addition to production tax credits, you can get a renewable power certificate for the power you generate, because it's so-called renewable power. You can sell that certificate, for instance, to a generator in California that burns diesel fuel or something like that. And let's see if I can find something here to read you. I'll just paraphrase it, but if you've got a big diesel generator for emergency purposes in California, you can buy these renewable energy certificates from a wind farm out here in the Midwest and go ahead and generate electricity with some of the dirtiest fuel, so-called dirty fuel, and call it renewable energy, because you bought the certificate from a wind farm out here. So this whole thing started when people became brainwashed on global warming. Okay, I'm going to try to be a comedian here, but when I was in college, back in the 70s, they were trying to brainwash me and the rest of my buddies on the new ice age. Have you ever heard of the new ice age? Look it up. Look it up on the computer. Look up new ice age. Look up Time magazine, they had some articles. Anyway, they thought we were going to be covered with ice by 1986. Well, that didn't happen. About 20 years later, however, now keep in mind the baby boomer generation is I'm a member of that. And about 20 years after I got out of college, this new ice age just didn't happen. But the female version of the baby boomers are starting to have hot flashes. Okay? By golly, it kept us from coming into the new ice age. And then about 20 years after that, that was all over with, so we didn't get it, that global warming didn't happen either, so they just called it, let's just call it climate change. So that's what we're dealing with today. I could go into a whole other deal, but I can't, but I'll finish up. Corn. Okay, corn, that reminds me. These wind turbines, the big tall turbines, work like a ceiling fan. There you go. The warm air wants to rise, and the cool air wants to settle. Corn needs to cool off at night. And at night, generally the wind dies down, and air becomes stratified. The cool air comes down, and maybe you'll get a little fog in the valley. Maybe you'll have a little dew on your corn in the morning. That's a good deal, because when that dew evaporates, it has an additional cooling effect on the leaves of your corn. And so those leaves have been standing there all day long in the sun doing their thing, generating carbohydrates from the sun and from the water and the minerals in the soil and from the CO2 out of the atmosphere. They take the carbon off of that molecule and they put this all together and create carbohydrates that they pack into those kernels. And the reason why it must cool off at night is because it shrinks those cells. They're called C4 cells. It means there's 4 carbons in each one of those cells, in the molecules in those cells that are responsible for photosynthesis. And they're just full of sugar water. And so at night when it cools off, it contracts those cells and wrings that out and pumps it down in the stalk towards the kernel. So cooling off at night is very, very important for a corn crop. That's why we can generally raise corn better here than we can in South America, because they don't cool off that much at night. And the dew is important also. You must have a temperature stratification with some humidity to create a dew. And with the dew, your baby rabbits get a little drink of water, and drink a dewdrop, and the baby birds and stuff. It's good for the wildlife, the small wildlife. And it's also good right after sunrise when it's cool and that evaporates, chills that leaf one more time. It brings that last little molecule of sugar water out of the leaf and pumps it to the kernel. Then the sun comes out, all goes over again. C4, that means there's 5% of the plants on the earth that are in the C4 category. The grasses and corn and that kind of thing. It uses only CO2 out of the atmosphere. This molecule is the single most important molecule we have, because this one is responsible for our food supply. If you didn't have carbon, you wouldn't have a corn plant. If you didn't have CO2, we wouldn't have oxygen, because the corn plant and all other plants that use CO2 break this carbon off and use it for the construction process and use it to create the carbohydrates, a lot of carbon in that, and they release the oxygen to us. So if you do something that compromises this molecule, you'll not only compromise the food supply, you'll also compromise your oxygen supply. And oxygen, like sex, becomes very important if you're not getting any. No? Okay. Okay. Questions? Good.
Okay. On the financing of these projects, are there individual investors?
Yes.
Oh. Are there individual investors in the area saying, hey, let's be part of this, and where does their money end up going and what type of return?
Okay, that process, okay, so what happens is you got a company and they usually create a corporation and they create an LLC. So the tax credits and assets go into this LLC, but LLCs don't like to hold a lot of assets. So they transfer them into a holding company. Okay, that's a holding company. Takes the assets out of here and puts them over here. And then if you want to invest in wind turbines, you buy stock in this holding company. It's kind of like Berkshire. It's a holding company. So you want to buy stock in this company here. And it's called, this process is called tax equity financing. And I got a paper on that here somewhere, but if you own stock in that company, then you'll get your share of the depreciation, and you'll get your share of the tax credit that that thing generates, and any other asset that that thing will generate. And you, according to an example I got, you can make about 16% on your money. And that doesn't sound too bad. The problem is, which really isn't a problem for you personally, is that your equity, when you buy this equity in here, there's some fine print that says that you will agree to sell your equity back to this company for about 10% of what you paid for it. So if you paid $120,000 for this thing, you'd be bought out at $12,000. Well, but with the depreciation and with the tax credits and things like that, you're going to end up making, according to an example I got that I can't put my finger right on, you're going to make about 16% a year. And that is going to total, I think in 5 years, about 188% or 88% return on your money or something like that. And so you're happy. And then they buy you out and put your, give you $12,000, you put that back, in your account. But they've just sold equity in this thing and they bought it back for 10%, 10 cents on the dollar. And it's called tax equity financing. So you have just lost your $120,000 to these guys now, and they have their equity back, and you helped them pay for it, but you ended up making some money. So you really don't care. But unless you understand the whole process of what's going on here, it's just hard to explain in a couple minutes. But thank you. Anybody else? Go ahead.
Yeah, are you familiar with Nebraska Statute 70-2001 to 2009?
I'm not.
It covers net metering.
Your what?
It's net metering.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, those are the statutes of the current law. And there's a lot of terms I'm seeing getting used interchangeably where I don't think they're appropriate. Firstly, net metering is limited to 25 kW. One of the first ones that law applied to is Dave Tobias, just south of Wayne in Pilger, on his 10 kW turbine. But net metering is designed to be a program to offset on-site power use, not for export. If you're an export facility, you were talking about 10 megawatts, you can't use 10 megawatts, you can't use a quarter of a megawatt.
No.
That's an export facility, that's not a net metering application. So I think we got terms kind of getting used. Another point of the law here you mentioned is that net metering sells the excess power to the grid under PURPA at retail. That's not true.
It was in
It's avoided cost.
It was back about 15 years ago, as I understood.
Okay, well, I was in Lincoln when the law was signed,
Okay.
so I'm somewhat familiar with it.
That probably.
We spent a lot of time in committee on that, and we're lucky to get what we get, but the utility boys came in and inserted their language into it, and long story, okay? But net metering sells excess under PURPA law at avoided cost rates, this is 2 or 3 cents and stuff, and that goes to the neighbor, they pay full retail, the utility's making the money off that stuff, not net metering excess. So I just wanna
Okay.
clear the air on that. On your graph, you showed the summer peak. Accordingly, Wind is a poor performer in the summer. That's not news. Solar does better, I agree. For that particular load with irrigation, you're all in there in this peak stuff. This past week, NERC is a federal agency that looks at power security and power grid stability, issued a report that the Midwest states are in trouble because we're close to capacity for winter loads. Not summer loads, for winter loads. That's where the concern is, like it is in Texas right now.
Okay.
That's what tends to pop the grids, because when you go into that really bad, you're right, it goes into the plug. And South Dakota and the PUC had an exchange just this past week on grid reliability, but it was focused on the winter loads.
Okay.
And that's where wind is good. Wind excels in the winter and the spring. And I monitored turbines for 20 years, so I see that in the numbers.
Can you tell me what the net production of a wind turbine is? I calculated the production based at 40% and a 1.5 cent per kilowatt hour, but I did not adjust that production for power taken off of the grid to turn the blades, to turn the nacelle, to provide electricity for heaters or dehumidifiers.
That kind of power is inconsequential to the output. And the 40%, now if you're referring to the term, is not efficiency but capacity factor. Because the turbine is rated for 5 megawatts, it doesn't make 5 megawatts, but if you average it out over the year, 24/7, 365, all that, there's what's called a capacity factor. So 40% is accurate for turbines that are 300 foot plus in the air or higher, these 500 foot or whatever these monsters are making now. They get over 40% because they're so much higher and away from ground friction. Okay, so that's the case. And when you look at that 40%, then it's a 365 number that you use as average.
That's what I calculated.
Your small wind turbines that are 100 foot, 125 foot, those guys are 16 to 20% because they're so much lower. So again, there's just, and I want to confirm your figure, that was correct.
I figured
This
it
NERC report talked about the winter load, so I wanted to point that out. And I've done energy surveys numerous times where the winter load actually exceeds the electric load because they're electric heating. Electric heating is like way overrated. Okay, net metering also cannot impact coal production in any state. According to state law I mentioned, it is capped at 1% of the grid. And I think those boys are pretty smart to be able to handle any spikes from net metering type of applications. The modified sine, I made my own power for 15 years on the farm in Nebraska. And I think the modified sine wave discussion might need to be reviewed. I don't know that we go from wild AC at commercial scale to DC back to AC. At a net metering scale you do. And modified sine waves, I agree. I started a boneyard of refrigerators and freezers and stuff off modified sine wave inverters. I found that out the hard way. But I don't think they do that at commercial scale. It's not efficient. Dependable energy is priceless. I like that. I'm going to use that. And then finally, I'd just like to mention on the cash flow analysis, I mean, we're here for Yankton County. You know, there's no doubt in anybody's mind, these are big boy toys. What their cash flow analysis, in my mind, is really none of our business. I don't know that we ask that of any industry. Show us your books before we let you come in. You know, I'm with you on the subsidies. However, if you want to look at the big picture, the subsidies on petroleum include our boys in uniform. And I got one. So, relatively speaking, the little tidbits that are given out for renewable energy are nothing compared to petroleum. And they've been doing it for 80 years. Is there coal in South Dakota? Do we have coal mining in South Dakota?
No mining.
So it's all Wyoming. So we're paying Wyoming to run the coal plant in South Dakota. Keep that in mind. Nebraska was the same thing. They love their coal, but they're paving the streets of Wyoming. Okay, I want to thank you for your time. You brought up a lot of stuff there. Keep us on our toes. Just a few things I wanted to reflect back on.
Thank you for the critique. I don't have the extent of knowledge in particular that you have on the electricity. My intent was to point out the basics and how out of balance this thing appears to me. I got an article here from Iowa Lakes Electrical Company, and it says a storm is brewing. Electric reliability is in jeopardy. I am a citizen of the United States first, before I am a person of my own interest, because I realize if this country no longer exists, I'm not going to be able to operate. And think about this, for instance. Think about your house as the consumers out here on the grid, and then think about your shop as all the commercial operators that use manufacturing, you know, everybody else that uses electricity in the matter of producing a living. So we got two things. We got production and we just got your house. If you had them, the only source of electricity you had was a wind turbine or solar or something like that, and nothing else, what would that do to your productivity?
Well, and people have the technology and options now. If that's a concern for their productivity, they can buy a solar panel or a wind turbine. We had both on the farm to have the all year round stuff, and you have a battery bank, and if the houses go down the street, you don't even know. This is a free country. I mean, people can do that. I think the bigger issue, well, we're just the county kind of looking out for the county residents on this. A lot of this stuff is really out of our scope. It's important. It is important to know and to appreciate what this is. They are primarily big boy toys, in my estimation. If they don't do anything really except in the county for the person who's getting paid to have one. That's the only guy that really benefits as far as I'm concerned. But in all fairness, on a big scale, if we've learned nothing, we should have learned not to have all our eggs in one basket. So 20% wind, 20% solar, you know, some coal, some this and that. That's where the stability comes from. And there's some smart people that manage this. And if we can't use it here, it's going to go somewhere where it can be used. And there's excellent prediction models to expect when the wind is coming. That's not rocket science anymore, too. There's some smart people working on this stuff. Is there waste? Is there grift? Of course there is, because big money's involved. But I think it can do some good if it's given right. One of the other things I saw from yours and other testimony is the setback distance. In my mind, that is the #1 thing, because if you have it close, you really have to really get in deep on the vibration, the noise, the setback, the flutter, because it's an issue. If you just get more setback, it's not so bad. You know, a lot of that is mitigated just because of distance. So I appreciate you mentioning it, because that's probably the biggest thing we'll have to consider as a group.
I think I'd want to add on that, the other thing to consider, as you said, they're big boy toys, and you did do a pretty good job of presenting the incentives around the big boys building these toys and how they try to maximize that, and particularly moving them around to different LLCs and all that other stuff. So I think that's something that we really have to think about when we talk about decommissioning, making sure that we're not stuck behind it, you know, some kind of shuffle off the responsibility in the end too. So
well, it was brought up, a point was made earlier that making the landowners at least part of the solution, because they are the ones getting the money in the county. So, you know, behind the schools, I know some tax things too, so I don't say that, but yeah, they should be able to belly up to the table and have some of that decommissioning sandwich too.
All right, well, thank you so much, Sher, for your time
All right.
and traveling
Yes, thank you,
here.
sir.
Thank you very much. I had written up some proposed zoning regulations, but I don't see them in my folder at the moment right now. I know I got it over there. So I thank you for now. If I can find that, if I can just have a couple minutes to review that. But for now, go ahead, would you?
Okay, thank you. All right, the only other item on our list was to talk about where wind is allowed in our county, which zones, and the setbacks associated with that. And I know we're not gonna get that all done in 15 minutes for 6 o'clock, so we can certainly go past 6 o'clock tonight, or we can delay it until next week. I think a good place to start is section 2603 in our current wind ordinance. And where are we at right now? Because we do have wind regulations already in place. And so part of the goal is to review what we have. Does it need to be changed, or is something missing? So right now, in that section, they split things into what they call small wind energy conversion systems, and those are less than 100 kilowatts. And then they have what's called a large or commercial wind energy conversion system, and that's everything over 100. So right now, rooftop wind turbines that are less than 100 kilowatts, which would be a pretty good sized tower, is allowed in low density, moderate density, high density, and lakeside commercial. So in those 4 districts, that is the only wind you can have is a rooftop system that can be no taller than 10 feet in height above the roof line of the structure. So when you think about that, that would be low density is about a half acre, moderate density, no, I'm saying that wrong. High density is a half acre. Moderate density is 1 and low density is 5. I said it backwards.
So you're looking at something above a roof line, you're really under 50 feet in the air. Maybe
Well,
a
technically-
2-story house plus 10 feet.
Technically, we don't have a height limit for houses. You know, so, but if you use
Yeah, realistically.
the realistic,
Yeah,
then that would be the height. So again, so high density, it is stated as shall allow rooftop mounted only. Moderate density, rooftop only. Low density, meeting or exceeding district requirement of 5 acre lots shall have total WEX height limit of 30 feet. So I shouldn't have included that low density in there. So you can have one on the ground, but it can't be any higher than 30 feet. It was rural transitional that can only have rooftop. For some reason, I wish they would have merged these differently in here. Planned unit development, again, they have a maximum height of 30 feet. So to me, you could have one on the ground, but it can only be 30 feet.
That seems way restrictive for a 5 acre lot. One other thing, just on in the definitions, and just to make note of it, that it's rated, the WEX shall be the wind energy conversion system equal to or greater than 100 kWh. It should be kW.
I was wondering that, because when we did the solar,
Yeah,
we did
it's kW is
KW.
power. H is actually energy, is because it includes a dimension of time.
Correct. So that will all have to be corrected in here, so let's go
Well,
with the kilowatts.
Yeah, and
then.
I would say greater than, because the feds consider small energy as up to 100 kW, and that's where the wind, that wind tax credit, or the small renewable energy tax credit tops off at is 100 kW. And there are wind turbines that are 100 kW. With solar, you can modularize it. With wind, you have to go by what the manufacturer makes. And there are good US-made 100 kW turbines, and you kind of nixing them in having it equal to or greater. It should be just greater, in my view. I think it's very nice that you would even consider allowing rooftop turbines in a built-up district. And in Nebraska, I put up a 30-foot turbine in town on a building, just kind of clamped it to a building, and it was 10 foot higher. And they let me do it, and I was very pleased with it, but I took it down because I said, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Because it was very turbulent, there was a lot of crosswinds from other buildings, and made noise, didn't make much power, so I yanked it. So I do know of a guy in Colton, South Dakota, that has one on his roof that's been very successful. He's in more of the residential area of town, and that's been good for him, and I think it's very accommodating to even allow that, you know, on the roof.
So the question is posed, should we?
That seems to
I
me.
mean, that's what we're reviewing, is should we allow rooftop systems to begin with?
I'm Mike Welch. Based on presentations that we've had and everything I've read, it really calls into question whether or not Yankton County should allow, even in agricultural or commercial districts, large-scale commercial wind operations. I know that at the moment you're discussing small-scale operations, but the real concern that most people have is not somebody that has a turbine on his roof or that has a 30-foot tower on a 5-acre lot. The real issue that people are concerned about, and I'm concerned about, is large-scale commercial wind operations in Yankton County. And I can't say that I've made up my mind, but I haven't seen a single proponent of those kinds of operations in Yankton County other than big money interest.
I know that's the big kahuna, but we should still, at the same time, I think we need to cover all of the things that are, all of the areas. Rooftop wind turbines, I always default to personal freedom and property rights as a guidance. Why should we tell people they can't do something that's reasonable to do? Rooftop wind turbines, I didn't necessarily have a great experience, but they'll find that out for themselves. You know, I think but they're not hazardous, they're not dangerous, they're not flying off the shaft and slicing people apart. It's not anything we should fear, and, you know, when in doubt, let them work it out, in my view.
The question is if you had a rooftop system that fails, does it affect the neighbor?
It's homeowners, it's a homeowner's thing, it's bolted to the house, it's all covered, it's inspected by
really,
the state.
It's really just the owner's problem. It's not really going to be a neighbor's problem.
Right, and the county doesn't wanna, you know, like we did on solar, if it's 100 kW or less, don't bother us.
Yeah.
50.
50.
We ended up at 50
Yeah.
on solar.
I liked 100 better, but I get that.
Yeah.
Because you can have a 80 kW that is mostly for self-consumption.
I look at this ordinance and it's,
But
you
you're
know,
gonna run you're gonna run afoul of the utilities, worry about that.
you know, I look at this ordinance and we have, it just like listed out for every different zone, and it's like, you know, it's really, you know, could we just make like the home, one that just covers all residential, and it's just like we make a definition of, this is the size of, this is a type of system, and it's just allowed in these zones.
We could.
And then that way the ordinance reads much cleaner and simpler.
Well,
And you
I
got
think-
one definition to
I don't think
cover
one
a lot of all
definition
these
is
things.
gonna cover it all, because the rooftop is really because you can't do a ground mount, you can't do, if you don't get over 50 feet, you're
Well,
pretty much wasting time.
but I mean, I'm
anyway.
talking about all these are all the small ones.
Right.
We just do one definition for all the small ones, and, you know, we have a long thing here where, yeah. The next question I think I see is like, okay, it's 30 feet, that's not very high. You know, and that makes a lot of sense for if you have a half acre or 1 acre lot. But then you start to look at things like a rural transitional, a PUD, the lakeside commercial. Some of those are larger lots out there, almost agricultural. I know we had an issue, the last wind tower that went up, there was some vagary around, okay, it's going to be 120 feet with the wingtip. Do we somehow have a higher height limit if you have the acreage?
Well, and you bring that out, that's a good point, because that should be covered in our definition of height. We talking rotor height, we talking hub height? Because on a small turbine, that's maybe a few feet. On a big turbine, that's hundreds of feet. So that may have to be set in our definition. And the setback, the next paragraph kind of will resolve most of those things.
Yeah.
If you don't have a 1.1 tower height, whatever that is defined as being, then
Yeah.
you can't do it anyway. And so that kind of trumps any of the, other cases where, somebody in the neighborhood's gonna try to put up a 100-foot tower.
Yep.
No.
And I think that's a good way to do it too, is like, yeah, I guess the setback with
If you have the room
ratio
to
and the
do it,
setback.
knock yourself out. kind
And
of
you have the
approach.
room, yep.
We may want to go with both.
Both. yeah.
Rotor height being what rotor height is, but, our law is going to be, or whatever the statute is.
You do
is
a
at hub
both,
height.
where you say, okay, it's everything 30 feet or less rooftop is allowed in all zones. But then you say, you also have a setback requirement that's determined by the
That's one
absolute
way to
height.
do it, kind of with two paragraphs, yeah.
Yep.
I just raise a question. We'll be getting into each of these individually with discussion as we're having. Is the intent to keep going or maybe start clean at the next meeting, going through this?
You have to go?
Okay.
Okay, well, we can certainly adjourn at
Yeah.
6 and then continue this, but so let's wrap up with, I think what Ryan is trying to say is that essentially a small system, whatever size we pick, 50 or 100, whatever that is, could go in essentially these zones here as long as it's 30 feet or less.
Yeah.
And your 1.1 times the height of the wind turbine measured from the ground surface to the tip of the blade.
To the tip of the blade, which would be, so yeah, you're talking, that's the height of your tower plus the tip of your blade.
But
Okay,
you're
so-
using you're using the height twice. 30 feet max.
Mm-hmm.
Again, on some of those lots you're wasting your time really. Like
Well,
Sky Street Mountain, 33 feet.
And is 30 the number? So,
I don't think
so,
the setback should determine the number.
well, but I don't think that a 1 acre house should have a 200-foot tower.
Well, if you
You
have
know
your
what I mean?
setback written,
Well,
you
if he's got
should.
220 feet
But-
back from all the property lines, he can.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
in the center, then you could calculate what the height is, but I
It's not a
struggle a little
pole.
bit with that. I
You
do.
don't have a Paul threat, which is where that 1.1 always came from, in case it comes crashing down.
Sherry, I have a question. Lauren Nelson. When we're talking about like a 10-foot rooftop, how big are those blades? How, like,
They're a couple feet.
they're a
blade.
couple feet?
Yeah, there's gonna be very small.
Okay.
Anything bigger is just not gonna, houses aren't built to supply those kinds of platforms.
And so is it like there's only, so when you're talking about rooftop or these that can go in low density places, are blades different sizes? Can they be 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot, or are they just like you can get 2 foot, but then the next one up is probably 10 foot? I mean, what's the,
Well, it's different than solar in that you have to go by what's on the market at whatever rated capacity they're at, and that is directly proportional to the swept area of 3, 4, 5, 6 blades. So the swept area is the disc that these blades would
Yep.
form as they're moving, and that's what drives
so when
the
you're
power
saying,
capacity.
rooftop and low density, you're talking like blades that are only, yeah, okay,
It's just, nobody's gonna do that.
okay.
So if we look at a 1 acre lot and it's
Okay.
square,
Yep.
200 by 200 is roughly 40,000 square feet, which is just shy of an acre.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about, if you put a pole or whatever in the center, you could have 100-foot max, and then you have to be 10 down, so 90 foot. So 90 foot, and that would be from base to tip height. So that'd be 1 acre. You could have a 90-foot tower on 1 acre lot.
I feel like that might be excessive.
That's why I say you've got
Yeah.
to look at the dimension,
Oh, I
and,
know.
and a square would be the absolute biggest you could get. I mean, a skinny lot, you'd work against yourself.
So I think that works.
Well, I
think
don't,
that system works. 90-foot tower is not that big.
but a 1 acre, and if you go out to the housing developments out here west of Yankton, there's a ton of 1 acre homes that would not be happy.
Because
No, it
Would not be
No.
happy.
No.
And those would be
I have a
our
1 acre
two.
lot, and I can assure you that if I had a 90-foot tower on my lot, my neighbors would probably be looking for me.
Well, that's part of the process for a CUP though, right? Your neighbors come in and say, hey, we don't want this next to us, and they'll give it to them.
Well, but you have to be careful because
Some people will do it.
because a county commission, Board of Adjustment hears that, and just because someone complains about it, does not give them the right to deny it.
Right.
It's
But you
kinda like,
could, yeah.
it's kinda like a hog barn. Just because you got 20 people sitting there saying, I don't want it, doesn't give you the right to deny it. So you have to have reasonings that are set out in the ordinance that can methodically go through. So when someone comes before you, they know exactly what's expected of them. And
Yes.
someone sitting in the audience complaining, whether it's one person or 1,000, you know, you take that into consideration, but it is not the linchpin. I'm just saying, having sat on a county commission and had
I
to
know
make
it's-
those
I've-
decisions,
I've been in
it's
fact
tough.
courtrooms too, that does
It's-
not guarantee the outcome, I understand.
It's tough, so I think we need to give some thought as to the height of these, and 30 feet may not be economical, then it's not economical, you're not gonna put it up
Well,
anyway.
33 feet is a very common height for a very common turbine known as the Sky Stream. And
That's-
it's 33 feet.
That's the information that's prudent, is what is on the market, this is the height of what's on the market.
And that's
Does
the
that
thing-
fit in a half acre, does it fit in an acre, does it fit
Oh,
in
well, they've been
5?
on schools, that was the whole thing,
No.
was the urban turbine with the swept blades, so you didn't have the whoosh.
Well,
and
there's two in Yankton right now, so there's one at the car wash, right on Broadway, and there's one at the school admin building.
Yeah.
Yep.
So those towers are in place, if you're curious, and the wind's howling, or when it's quiet,
The head at the car wash.
go
is
stand by it, and you get an idea, would I wanna live by that? So that gives you a good reference, yes, sir.
Oh, sure. I was just gonna comment that I sat on the planning commission when that decision was made on that one on Broadway. And part of that discussion was the setting. So there's more to it than just the square footage.
Yes, both those locations are by well-traveled roads. They're
Plus-
not in
plus
a
there was
residential
no
section.
residential behind it.
Correct, yeah. So, that's food for thought. And, obviously, the agriculture and the commercial districts and stuff, I mean, when we're talking the big towers, they're not gonna go anywhere except for ag. They won't go in commercial, because we don't have enough commercial space to put them up. So they will be in ag. So next time, let's talk about that. Anything else before we close out? Perfect. I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Heine, you'll give it to Heine. Second by Hornstra. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody. Shut off your microphones if, well, I think I can get them. There we go.